Hi there, and welcome back to Mysteries channel. Like always, I want to say, hey, thanks for clicking on my video. Today's might be a little bit long. I'm going to try to condense it without leaving out any of the information that I feel like is important about it. But yeah, honestly, if I did a video where I included everything, it would never end. It would continue on till the end of time. Long after I'm dead, I would have to find somebody else to fill in the spot of Mysteries channel to continue it on, because it goes on forever. What am I talking about? I'm talking about what most people call MKULTRA, but in truth, it's a program that has had many names and has been going on for much longer than the CIA would have you believe. The program MKULTRA has been renamed and rebranded many, many times. The programs that I could find linked to MKULTRA so far, because I'm sure it's continuing on to this very day, are Project Artichoke, Project Bluebird, Project Chitwit, Project MKULTRA, MK Delta, MK Naomi, Project Often, Project Search, Operation Midnight Climax, and I am positive the list goes on and on and on. In fact, there's a document showing that there were at least 149 other projects umbrellaed under MKULTRA. Here's the document I'm talking about. We're just going to scroll down to that portion of it. Okay. After August 3rd hearing, my staff assembled the few documents then available on MK Search, the follow-up project under which the non-terminated portion of MKULTRA activities was funded. The same officer who had been responsible for discovering the 7 boxes of MKULTRA material, which gave us our first detailed insight into the 149 MKULTRA sub-projects, reasoned that the mechanics of funding and record keeping should have been similar for both programs. 149 other projects. I only listed off 9. Think about that. Seriously, let it set in for a while. Now, why would this be? Well, because it's a perfect way to dodge a congressional bullet, or any kind of bullet, really. If they start asking questions, all you do is you change the project name and you hand in the papers associated with what they already busted you on. Oh, MKULTRA, yeah, we have those papers. Here you go. Oh, no, that's all of it. I swear that's all of it. Oh, shoot, you also know about Artichoke? Here we go. Here's another 14 boxes full of papers, but that's all of it, I swear. And effectively, this is the way we never truly fully know all of it. Although we now know that it was used on many different parts of society, I think that we should also truly think about the fact that it was used on people in the highest level of government. Okay, let's start. MKULTRA was the CIA mind control program. It's a code given to the program of experiments on human subjects that were designed and undertaken by the CIA, some of which were illegal and performed on American citizens as well as citizens of other countries without their knowledge. Experiments on humans were intended to identify and develop drugs and procedures to be used in interrogations in order to weaken the individual and force confessions through mind control. The project was organized through the Office of Scientific Intelligence of the CIA and coordinated with the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. When you're researching this, you're going to see that the official narrative is that the operation was officially sanctioned in 1953, was reduced in scope in 1964, and then further curtailed in 1967, but was officially halted in 1973. I, however, believe that there is evidence that this began in 1949, possibly earlier, and believe that this same project is being run with a different name currently. MKULTRA used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects' mental states and brain functions. Techniques included the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, LSD is one that we all know of, and other chemicals, electroshock, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, as well as many other forms of torture. Now hold all of that into your brains, let that sink and simmer in there while I introduce some people to you. The first person I want to introduce is James Vincent Forrestal. He was born February 15th of 1892. He died May 22nd of 1949. He was the last cabinet-level United States Secretary of the Navy and the very first United States Secretary of Defense. President Roosevelt appointed Forrestal as a special administrative assistant in June of 1940. 6 weeks later, he nominated him for a newly established position, Under Secretary of the Navy. In his nearly 4 years as Undersecretary, Forrestal proved highly effective at mobilizing domestic industrial production for the war effort. He became the Secretary of the Navy in 1944 after his immediate superior, Secretary Frank Knox, died of a heart attack. Forrestal led the Navy through the closing years of the war and the early years of demobilization that followed World War II. He also introduced the policy of racial integration in the Navy and traveled to combat zones to see forces in action. He was in the South Pacific in 1942. He was present in several battles, and he was also a witness to the Battle of Iwo Jima. In fact, the original flag that was flown up the pole was later taken down. A larger one was put on. Forrestal received that flag, the original flag that was hung up on the pole. So Forrestal, along with others, in the early months of 1945, strongly advocated a softer policy towards Japan that would permit a face-saving surrender. He wanted to give them an out. If they would surrender, then he had less to worry about Russia. That actually did happen, in a sense, almost the way he wanted it to, but only after the 2 bombs were dropped. After the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, Japan decided it wanted to honor the Potsdam Declaration. However, it wanted to do it on its own terms, to save face for their emperor. Forrestal came up with a shrewd and simple solution. Accept the offer, declare that it accomplishes what the Potsdam Declaration demanded, say that the emperor and the Japanese government will rule subject to the orders of the supreme commander of the Allied forces. It was seen as being close enough to an unconditional surrender. In 1947, President Truman appointed him as the first United States Secretary of Defense. Forrestal continued to advocate for complete racial integration of the services, which was eventually implemented in 1949, and during private cabinet meetings with Truman in 46 and 47, he argued against the partition of Palestine on the grounds that it would infuriate Arab countries, who supplied much-needed oil for the U.S. economy. Instead, he favored federalization plan for Palestine. Truman, he kept his mouth shut, and in the end, this is what proved, I believe, to be Forrestal's downfall. It kind of sealed his fate. Forrestal's his view on this situation and other situations like it earned him some sideways glances from congressmen and supporters of Israel. All this while journalists found their new man to hate. Many pieces were written about him. Many accused him of being the most dangerous man in the world, that his views on the world would cause World War III, and it didn't help that he also opposed unification of the military services proposed by Truman. In 1948, though, Truman won the presidential election, and the pushback that Forrestal gave him regarding Palestine and the unification of the military services wasn't forgotten. These were all things that Truman himself stood for. The end was near. In 1949, angered over Forrestal's continued opposition to his defense economization policies and concerns about reports in the press over his mental condition, Truman abruptly asked Forrestal to resign. By March 31st of 1949, Forrestal was out of a job. He was exhausted and overworked, and Forrestal entered a psychiatric treatment facility. The attending physician, Captain George N. Raines, was handpicked by the Navy Surgeon General, and this is the treatment that follows. Week 1, narcosis with sodium amytal. What is narcosis? When you look it up, truth serum pops up. The drugs that were used for this range, but in general, subjects questioned under the influences of such substances have been found to be suggestible and have their memories subject to reconstruction and fabrication. What is sodium amytal? It has sedative hypnotic properties. It is a white crystalline powder with no odor and slightly bitter to taste. It was first synthesized in Germany in 1923 and is considered an intermediate acting barbiturate. If it is taken for extended periods of time, physical and psychological dependencies can occur. And week 2, then it says second. This would be the second part of the regime was of insulin subshock combined with psychotherapeutic interviews. According to Dr. Rains, the patient overreacted to insulin much as he had to the Amytal, and this would occasionally throw him into a confused state with a great deal of agitation and confusion. Week 4, insulin administered only in stimulating doses. 10 units of insulin 4 times a day, morning, noon, afternoon, and evening. Basically, in every way they could fuck with this guy, they did. According to Dr. Rains, they even considered electroshock, but thought it better to postpone it for another 90 days. In reactive depression, if electroshock is used early, the patient is returned to the same situation from which he came. And there is a grave danger of suicide with this. And his doctor was quoted as saying, "So strange enough, we left out the electroshock to avoid what actually had happened anyhow." That's right. Housed on the 16th floor in Bethesda Naval Hospital, a man who was once one of the top leaders of our country, a man who successfully ran the Navy during and after the war, becomes depressed, is sent to a hospital, then throws himself out of the 16th-story window. One report says that there was a bathrobe fashioned as a noose around his neck. Others don't report this. This is James Forrestal. Now let me introduce Frank Olson. Frank Olson was born in July of 1910 and died in November of 1953. He was an American bacteriologist, biological warfare scientist, and a CIA employee who worked at Camp Detrick, now Fort Detrick in Maryland. At a meeting in rural Maryland, he was covertly dosed with LSD by his CIA supervisor. 9 days later, he plunged to his death out of a 10th-story window from a New York City hotel. The U.S. government first described his death as suicide and then as misadventure, while others allege murder. The Rockefeller Commission report on the CIA in 1975 acknowledged their having conducted drug studies, and this is the first his family ever heard of it. That no, their dad didn't just commit suicide for no reason, just jump out of a window, that something else was at play. So in 1994, his son, Eric Olson, had his father's body exhumed to be buried with his mother and decided to have an autopsy performed. The original autopsy had reported that Dr. Olson had cuts and abrasions on his bodies. Theories sparked that Olson was assassinated by the CIA. When the second autopsy was performed, the team searched the body for cuts and abrasions and found none. I wonder why, because it was just 40 effing years later. Like, what the fuck? But they did find a large hematoma on the left side of his head and large injuries to his chest. Most of the team concluded that the blunt force trauma to the head and the injuries to the chest didn't occur from the fall, but likely occurred in the room before the fall, and suggest that the evidence reeked of homicide. In the end, Frank Olson's family believed that as he was a part of MKULTRA without his knowledge, the CIA assassinated him to contain any and all information on what they were doing to him and many other unsuspecting people. Okay, and here is another link I'm going to provide to you. All these links that I'm going to show you here for a second, I will throw down at the bottom so you can go through them. Just notice though how jacked up this one is. They just make it so hard to get information. One page right, and then all of a sudden sideways, what is this? But once you go down to the next page, you will see that Frank Olson is mentioned in here. Also, you will notice that Project Artichoke and Project Bluebird are also part of the MKULTRA family of shit. Regular, sideways. Also, the pages are kind of like out of sequence and all crazy in there. It does bring up a bunch of different projects, and it looks like around page 396, 397, they do talk about Dr. Olson. There is that. The other thing I want to say about Frank Olson is that Netflix has a documentary on this called Wormwood. I haven't watched it yet, but I do plan to. I just haven't had time to. Now, Frank Olson and I am also suggesting that Forrestal were both people that were subjected to MKULTRA without any knowledge to it. And there were plenty of people from all walks of society. Obviously, upper government, the CIA's own employees. There are many people that are regular citizens of society that claim to have been part of this, but there's also this. Holmesburg Prison. No one suggests that this is part of MKULTRA. Most suggestions state that Holmesburg Prison was used for something else, but let's go over it. It's a place that I'm willing to bet is what nightmares are made of. It's a site of the controversial, decades-long dermatological, pharmaceutical, and biological weapons research projects involving testing on inmates. The prison was viewed as a human laboratory. So common was the experimentation in the 1,200-person facility that around 80 to 90% of the inmates were experimented on. Most of the experiments on the inmates were said to be for dermatological items, but I found this batch of chemicals also made their way into the prison population. And here are some of them. Agent 282 produces grogginess and lightheadedness. Agent 834, mental impaired and hallucinations. CAR 302 and 212, lightheadedness. CAR 302 and 368, lightheadedness, slurred speech, and a lack of drive. Agents 1 through 11, dullness of consciousness and difficulty distinguishing reality from fantasy. Agent 668, mildly high symptoms and intoxication. What I'm suggesting here is that MKULTRA was operational on unsuspecting people in our government as well as all other stratus of our society. The list of people saying that they were connected to this project is long. I believe that there have been at least 10 individuals that sued the CIA after obtaining evidence of their involvement, and many, many more say they were, but couldn't produce evidence, which is super crazy because I would never suspect the CIA to destroy incriminating evidence. No, not them. So we know that Frank Olson was drugged without knowledge, possibly tortured, and then terminated by a 75-foot fall to a hard surface. But Forrestal is still looked at like a suicide, probably because he was so high up in the government that if it were to come out that he was given the same treatment as unsuspecting CIA employees and prisoners and other ordinary citizens of the country, we would begin to truly question who is running this shit show. My question is, was Forrestal being drugged before he made it to Bethesda? And it's kind of hard to say, but we can absolutely say that in 1949, the year that Forrestal died, MKULTRA-like projects were already running. But as we scroll on down, we go through the suggestion to put a suggestion box in the handicap month where people will learn how to sign language. Keep on going. We will get to the point where it begins to talk about projects. And then we get to this point. Now here, it's a redacted document, but once we come down here, we see that on August 15th, 14th feet of material relating to Project Artichoke was discovered at the Agency Archives and Record Center. The material relating to the 1949 through 1956 period. Artichoke was already in act by 1949. Now that we've gone over that, let's introduce a new player to the game. I'm going to introduce Robert Blum. Now, I would love to give you more information on him, when he was born, when he died, but in reality, he's a ghost in the system. Every single other person I've listed has a wiki page associated with them, and many others that are well below this guy's function in the CIA have a wiki page associated with him, but Robert Blum, oddly enough, doesn't. In fact, the only documents that with this guy's name on it or any info on him are pages pulled down from the CIA website or a website called Muckrock, which is like a CIA watchdog website that goes through anything they release and tries to find out what's really actually happening. So that's kind of interesting. Why is this guy a ghost? The excerpts I'm going to read to you all come from that site Muckrock, and it gives you a little bit of a picture of who Robert Blum is. I can tell you that he was a Yale graduate, and that even for students of the intelligence community, Robert Blum is all but forgotten except for as a bureaucrat, a professor, and the head of a foundation with ties to the CIA. In reality, he was a counterintelligence chief who worked for several agencies, built large pieces of the United States foreign economic policies, had the director of the Central Intelligence fired, and redesigned a significant portion of the intelligence community, including its mechanisms for covert action and propaganda. Now, here's an excerpt that I found. Admiral Sowers did not refer again to the political phase of this investigation, but talked about Robert Blum. It seemed that he was drafted from Forrestal's staff as it were, to do the staff work for Dulles, Jackson, and Correa. At one point, Sowers spoke of Correa as the central figure. Apparently, this was because Correa was close to Forrestal as well. But then he stressed the work of Blum as the one who actually wrote the Dulles report. It was not understood, however, that Dulles, Jackson, and Correa didn't do any of it. It was just Robert Blum. Now, this is McNary's assignment. McNary's part in this investigation, said Sowers, was simply to put a committee which digested the Dulles report for the NSC and made recommendations. Sowers sat in on occasion. The amusing point about this was that McNary used Blum as his guide. The result was, to Blum's assessment, that he made recommendations with regard to his own findings. Of course, this presents a conflict of interest. So what is this report that they're mentioning? In 1949, the Intelligence Survey Group had produced the Dulles-Jackson-Correa report, which found the CIA had failed in responses to both the coordination and production of intelligence. In response, the U.S. National Security Council accepted the conclusions and recommendations of this report. It remained to implement them. In 1950, President Truman decided that Smith was the man needed for the CIA. Before Smith could assume the post on October 7th, there was a major intelligence failure, the North Korea invasion of South Korea in June of 1950. This resulted in the Korean War. Now let's go on to more of those little excerpts. Secretaries Forrestal and Lovett had decided in the presence of Sowers, Dulles, and Blum that Galloway should go, and had offered to Dulles the post of director over both secret intelligence and covert operations, including subversive activities. By June 4th, Blum was writing to Dulles, Correa, and Jackson, and that they were ready for their first comprehensive report on the agency. In deciding upon the type of report, he said they should know more clearly the premise underlying their work. Blum offered these. For example, it now appears that even though it is generally recognized that Admiral Hillenkoetter is not entirely satisfactory as Director of Central Intelligence, there is no readiness to replace him at present. On the other hand, there is a willingness, approaching enthusiasm, to dispense with services of Wright and presumably certain others with him and Galloway. If this is the case, then we may want to work directly with Hillenkoetter in bringing about necessary reform within the CIA and in the relations between the CIA and other agencies. So basically, he is stating that he's not very fond of Hillenkoetter, who is the director of the CIA, but he really wants to replace others in the CIA, and he's willing to use this guy to do it. So let's do that. Let's put in the people we want in our spots that we want under this guy and use him even though we don't really want him either. Let's continue. Hillenkoetter himself was quite willing to be relieved, especially after the adoption of NSC 50, which was in July of 1949. He had never wanted to be DCI. It had been painfully frustrating and a thankless experience. He was convinced that the survey group, General McNary, and the National Security Council had never understood the problem and that they had all been misled by a clever clerk. That clerk, Robert Blum. So what is the survey group? This Baldwin article impressed Robert Blum, who had just become Secretary Forrestal's staff assistant for NSC and CIA affairs. Blum was concerned about the competence of the three military intelligence agencies, as well as about the competence of the CIA in the interdepartmental coordination of the intelligence activities. Blum proposed that the group of qualified consultants be formed to survey the agencies. So not only was the group formed, the report written, and then findings on the report, suggestions on how to correct it, all came from one person, a clerk named Robert Blum that you find next to no information on. Again, interesting. In 1949, Intelligence Survey Group had produced the Dulles-Jackson-Correa report, which found that the CIA had failed in its responsibilities in both the coordination and the production of intelligence. In response, the U.S. National Security Council accepted the conclusions and recommendations of the report, all of that coming from one person, and then remained to implement them. In May of 1950, President Truman decided that Smith was the man needed for the CIA. Before Smith could assume the post on October 7th, there was a major intelligence failure. That was the one I talked about earlier, the Korean War. Now I want to I want to share this little excerpt. This is to the director. It says this: "You will recall granting General Hillenkoetter an appointment at 10:15 a.m. on October 24th of 1950. After leaving your office, the Admiral confidentially advised Agent Delap that he had conferred with Admiral Sowers regarding the apparent stupidity of Mr. Williams Jackson, new Deputy Director of the CIA. He felt that Admiral Sowers would attempt to do something about replacing Jackson as soon as this could be done without raising too much of a fuss." But what happened instead? According to one of the declassified interviews with Admiral Sowers, the report's recommendation that Hillenkoetter himself be replaced with DCI wasn't accidental. Sowers himself alleges that Blum had determined to get Hillenkoetter fired, and that this was the source of the committee's focus on the CIA. Why, though? Who did they want in that position instead? Well, here is the list of the directors at this point in time. Hillenkoetter, the first, even though the CIA wasn't called the CIA until about 1946, before then, but once the CIA, Hillenkoetter is the first. He never wanted the position, and I couldn't find very many instances where he is tied to anything super fucked up. The very second person right after him is someone called Walter Bedell Smith. His nickname is Beetle. What do you know? Smith stepped up efforts to obtain economic, psychological, and photographic intelligence. Smith is remembered in the CIA as the first successful director of Central Intelligence and is one of the most effective, who redefined its structure and mission. He changed that agency forevermore. And the first government coup sponsored by the CIA is run by him. Operation PB Success to overthrow the Guatemalan government begins with Beetle. So in the end, I believe that Robert Blum was employed into the CIA to alter the course of the organization forever. Forrestal opposed Truman. He wasn't a yes man. He gave opinion that was critical to those above him. He was about preserving American values and constitutional rights. He was for American policing, but so that war didn't break out again. But he was against overthrowing and ruling other lands. I think that just before Hillenkoetter is fired from the CIA, these programs are beginning right under his nose, but he is not aware. They're being secretly rolled out. Blum is put into office to create the report that fires the director so they can get their own man in. In comes Smith, the man that makes the CIA into what it is known for and despised for to this day. Now, although the CIA will say that MKULTRA started while Smith was only on his way out, documents show that it happened before then. It may have happened right before Smith took over, most definitely while Robert Blum was in there and very close to Forrestal, a man that just kind of pissed off everybody above him because he had his opinions and he stuck to them. And let's not forget the documentation that clearly shows that in 1949, Artichoke was already in play. Robert Blum was attached to the CIA, was connected to Forrestal right at the time of his demise. He was the sole writer of the Dulles-Jackson Korea Report, the very one used to get Walter in and Hillenkoetter out. So as soon as Blum hits the scene, where you start to see him really in power moves, many people are taken out of the CIA. Then the boss is taken out. A man comes in, reorganizes the entire thing. He leaves because he has some serious health problems. I don't know for sure. I'm not going to pretend like the CIA gave those to him. I mean, I think having an evil soul probably does that anyway. And then what happens? We get Dulles. Who is Dulles? Well, he is a man that's connected to many of the world's craziest kinds of fuckery. Let's remember his legacy. MKULTRA and 149 other umbrella projects connected to it. Bay of Pigs. Operation Ajax, overthrowing of the Iranian government. U-2 spy planes were approved by Dulles and flown by CIA agents, employees to begin with, before they went to the Air Force. Operation PB Success still ran when Dulles stepped in. You know, just another government overthrow. And also, let's not forget the Warren Commission, where Dulles was appointed as an investigator into the Kennedy assassination, you know, not too long after he was fired by Kennedy. I do believe that Forrestal was a victim of MKULTRA, and it just makes you wonder how many other people in high places in government were taken care of this way. Man, what an effective way it is. Convince the family of the people who rock the boat that they are going crazy. Melt their brains with brain gravy and let them meet pavement from high above. Works every time. Oh, and I think I said earlier that I thought that the program ran from 1949 until current. Officially, it halted in 1973, but I want to throw this article up here for a moment. What is this article? Oh, this article talks about how Nixon's aides were possibly drugged. And this is also where I was introduced to Gottlieb. I might do another video on this because, man, it is so freaking crazy. I might just do another video just to show you how they get away with this shit. And it's all about the Senate hearings and the joke that it all is. They make it sound like another government drugged these people, but I am willing to bet that this was some homegrown shit, if you know what I mean. I just thought I would share all this stuff. It's kind of, crazy and scary to think about, but I feel like it's important because when I was younger, when I very first heard about this, everybody was just like, this, it just seems so preposterous that it could never, ever, how could this even be true? But obviously it's true. It's really true. It's true. And it's happening, and we should all talk about it and know about it. And we should really make it hard for them. Start going through their paperwork. Just make them really have to freaking work at hiding it because they did a really shitty job for a long time there. And I'm willing to bet there's so many projects out there that are still going on, happening to us out here that we're not even 100% aware of, but there's probably evidence of it in all of their stuff. Anyway, that's what I have today. Tell me what you think. Am I just propagating a crazy theory and adding more to it, or is it a possibility? Was there a kind of crazy intergovernment coup going on at this point in time? Anyway, you guys have yourselves a very great day.